Hi, Luke Andreski. Welcome back to 10 by 6.
Hi, Jason. Nice to be here again.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing to have you on again, mate. Thank you very much. Today, our focus is going to be in two parts, but we're looking effectively at the five articles that you published on Dorset Eye around the topic of morality. And morality, as you identify, is an absolutely key and essential part of human existence, which we're going to look into and delve into. Um, so again, thank you for coming on and thank you for taking on this topic. I mean, as a sociologist myself, one of the key elements of understanding how people are socialized and conditioned in society is morality alongside values and beliefs and ideas and all those sorts of things. So let us kick off with, how do you define morality?
Okay. So that's really what the first couple of articles in my series are about, in that nobody really has a shared vision of what morality is. There's so many alternatives. There's utilitarianism, there's kind of emotivism, there's intuitionism, that it's just what you feel is right. And even putting aside agreeing what's right or wrong, or good or bad, the fabric or content of morality, even
Yes.
agreeing what morality is something that people find hard to do. And I'd add to that another thing, and that is that morality is also something that has developed negative connotations because of this history of being used as a tool of oppression. So it's been part of a system for reinforcing hierarchy and making sure that we know our place. You've got to know, you've got to respect and listen to your betters. You've got to respect the existing order of things. So what's been called morality in the past has often not been what I would define as morality at all. It's more been a stricter of rules developed to sustain a particular social setup or arrangement.
Yes.
So in terms of a definition, my first two articles really try to find that. What I try to say is, what is it that makes up morality? What are the necessary characteristics? And I come up with a few options. And then I say, but actually, if you're looking to understand something, to know what something is, you need to go to Aristotle's fourth cause, which is what something is for. So, what's a car? What is a car? Well, a car is windows, windscreen wipers, doors, bonnet, wheels. But that's not a car. A car is for something. If you really want to understand a car, you could just sit one there. And if you didn't know it was for moving from A to B, you wouldn't know what a car is. So I also say, if we really want to know what morality is, we need to know what it's for. And so I try in my second article to try and whittle down what it might be for.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can I interject a little bit there then? Okay. So let's assume that humans never existed. And let's say we're talking about something that's natural, like the bumblebee. We wouldn't have this philosophizing because philosophizing is effectively just a human thing. So the bumblebee would still be a bumblebee, even though we didn't have humans around to define what it was for. So does that complicate matters a little bit?
It does. So what I come to in perhaps I'll very briefly outline those kind of conclusions of those first two articles. So in the first one, I suggest that there are some essential features of morality that if a moral code or code of behavior was lacking these, you couldn't really call it morality. It just wouldn't work. And in the article, I kind of give reasons why it wouldn't work. So the first of these is universality, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure. And and morality doesn't really work. The way we use language and the way the concept hangs together doesn't really work unless you implicitly believe that you're doing something that's universal. If I say that's wrong, I'm not saying that's wrong just for me. I'm really saying that's wrong for everybody. Killing innocent children, that's wrong for everybody. It's not just me. So there's an implicit way in the way we use the language which implies this universality. And in the article, I try and give a bit of substance and why that's so. So universality is one of the big first things. But a second really important...
Can I interject there as well? Sorry, yeah. So would that be the understanding of the universality, for example, of killing children? Would that be a normative value that we attach to morality as opposed to empirical one? Because we know empirically that people do kill children. So is it more of a normative approach, do you think?
So I think morality is normative. I think morality does provide guidance. So that's what, in fact, I come up with 7 features, which I think is essential to anything that claims to be morality. And guidance, offering some sort of guidance, which is normative, is one of those things. So there are 2 other things which I claim as well as this universality, and one is sentience. So for morality to work, for us to be able to say you should do this, you shouldn't do that, this is what we all ought to do together, the involved parties have to be able to understand what's even being said.
Yes.
It's a cognitive, it's a conscious thing. So in terms of your bumblebee, a bumblebee wouldn't understand it. There'd be no point in saying you shouldn't do that, bumblebee. You shouldn't sting me. It's not very nice. It just doesn't make sense. It's not something you do. It's the same. You wouldn't say it to a robot or a machine. You wouldn't say it to anything that isn't fundamentally sentient. And
but at the same time, though, Luke, if we didn't exist, the bumblebee still exists.
Yes.
And what the bumblebee is for on the planet may not be exactly how human beings understand its role on the planet. So what we are doing is imposing a human perspective upon nature, which nature, if given that sentience, might respond and say, actually, you're partially right, but actually you're also quite wrong.
Yes, that's right. So, but then, what is morality? Is that comes back to your definition of the question? Is morality something that does apply beyond humanity or beyond sentience? And I would suggest it's a construct. Morality is a construct.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
It's a human creation. So when I say universal, I don't mean it's an objective universal fact that's imbued in atoms or imbued in the entire universe.
Yes.
I mean, it's universal in the sense it has to be applicable universally amongst sentient, autonomous beings.
Right. And does that mean
anybody who's using morality needs to be?
Does that mean culturally universal? In other words, the way in which different cultures condition its members, do they create this sort of aggregation, if you like, of universality? In other words, is it something it's more in us than it is, it's more intrinsic than, esoteric or external? Or is it something that actually there is a differential across time? It does evolve, it does change, and it's dependent upon, as I say, on states and cultures, etc.
So that we need to tie in 2 things on that score, and one is that issue of universality, which I say is an intrinsic. It's if it's not universalizable, then it's not morality. Is one of my arguments.
Yes.
This issue also ties in very closely with the analysis in my second article, where I try to define what morality is for, and I'll skip all the argument I make to come to a certain conclusion. I'll give you a conclusion straight away. And the conclusion is, I'm saying morality is a social construct. It's like money. It's like laws. It is something. It has that reality of being an objective social. It's out there.
Yes.
But it's still a social construct. And what's it for? Well, it has various characteristics and lots of things you can say it's not for. And I work my way to a definition of saying what it's for is for uniting and unifying groups and communities and tribes and essentially sentient autonomous individuals. One of the other characteristics I identify in the first article is that there's a presupposition of freedom in morality. That is absolutely central to it. And again, we may come back to that. So, so you've got to be free, you've got to be sentient, and on that basis, it applies. I'm suggesting it's a tool, and if it's a tool, then it's a tool that needs to be universally available for use. So it needs to be a tool you can use in any culture. It needs, so I'm saying it actually transcends culture. If it doesn't transcend culture, I'm saying it's not actually morality. If it's a cultural norm, then it's just that, it's a cultural norm.
Yes.
If it can't reach beyond or transcend the boundaries between two individuals, or two tribes, or two communities, then it's not doing its job. And I'll tell you what I called it in the end. I called it a universal sentience unification system. This is the tool. This is what it is. It's for unifying sentience across the board. And there are reasons why that seems to fit with the nature that I described in the first article.
Yes. Yes. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So, having identified then what it is to some extent, and I think we've also addressed, as you said, why it's important. Is there anything else that you want to add to how we address the issue of morality as an important structure?
Yes. Well, I would actually. I would say that if you look at our culture today, and you look around, you switch on the news, you take any sort of the briefest look around you at where we are now, and we're in a terrible mess. We're in a terrible predicament as a species and as a society. You know, we are. I'd say we're splintering. I think we're almost in the death throes of a civilization. You know, if you look at the climate change, the spiraling out of control of inequality, division, the culture wars, everything you look at suggests a kind of social breakdown and a huge threat to our entire civilization in the terms of, you know, war, AI. It's as if we've got the horsemen of the apocalypse riding down towards us. So in the face of that disintegration, what do we really need? What do we really need? We need something that's going to make us all look at each other and say, how can we work together? You know, and I'm saying there's a tool. There's a tool we've had for years. We've used it since 180,000 years ago, BC or something. You know, when tribes first started, well, when humans first started gathering into larger groups and forming and spreading across the earth. Without that ability to bind together as communities or tribes or villages or civilizations, we wouldn't have achieved any of the stuff we've achieved. So we have this tool. It's there at our disposal. We just need to be clear about what it is, and we need to then think about, do we want to use it? Is this a tool that actually could help solve some of this breakdown and conflict that we seem to be faced with?
There is a slight issue there, obviously, when we go back to looking at the genealogy of humanity. We trace its evolution based on the knowledge and information that we currently have. We are also aware that the Homo sapien played a large part in the extinction of the Neanderthal. So was that praxis? Was that the nature of the agency of the Homo sapien in that respect? Can we link that to morality?
Yes, we can. So morality is a tool for unifying groups. And because of its universality, it can't be a tool for unifying one group of sentient beings. It's got to be able to transcend that. So if two groups meet, then morality is how you unify the two groups. If two civilizations meet, morality should be future-proofing for how you could potentially unify. If you could both agree to this shared code of behavior, then that should unify even two civilizations. So as a tool, it's given us a huge advantage. So being able to unify and work together, sharing a set of values and set of myths and a set of moral codes of behavior, that's allowed us to become an incredibly potent force. So first of all, it may have been just tribes becoming bigger, larger, more able to predate. Now, predation, it's not moral, but it's just something that this tool allowed us to do. So because we could be united, it meant we could be effective. That doesn't mean that there aren't other aspects of human nature which then don't come into play because we are such a large and powerful force. And we're seeing all those things. We've united to create a civilization, and then as a united civilization, we've got on with destroying our world. So it doesn't mean that morality stops us from doing other things that our destructive elements of our nature may encourage us to do, but it's there as a unifying tool which may be advantageous and which could show us a way for avoiding the dangerous repercussions of our power.
Because there's a direct correspondence as well, which I'll come on to in a moment. But again, when we go back to looking at our understanding of our evolution and our ancestors, what we've also found evidence of is that there was evidence of crossbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthal. But that in itself created conflict within groups. So it's only a hypothesis, but it's one that's put forward as to why the Homo sapiens contributed so significantly into eradicating the Neanderthals, because they didn't like the fact that there was that crossbreeding. Then if you bring that way forward, Luke, to the 16th, 17th, 18th and parts of the 19th century with the slave trade, again, you have this legitimization by one group to be able to enslave another group and to treat that other group as inferior, and so that their deaths are actually perceived by some of them as being welcomed. And certainly the experience that was imposed upon that group is very much hierarchical, which was like you were talking about earlier. So there's a direct correspondence between how humans treated Neanderthals and how humans have treated other humans, because of physical differences and ideologies that have been constructed in order to reinforce and to justify.
I think that's absolutely right. And what I would say is that the ethos that allowed the successful group or civilization to enslave, successful in quotes, to enslave or dominate or even eradicate the other population, that ethos isn't a moral one. It's not about morality at all. It's about dominance. It's about exploiting resources or taking control of resources. It's about all sorts of other things and power, but not about morality. So what I'm saying is, if morality is about unifying with others, if that is the absolute core, so that could actually be our definition. My name for morality is a kind of definition, a universal sentience unification system. So if morality is about uniting with others, then when we approached the Neanderthals, so when we approached the people living in Africa as colonialists, we weren't going there and saying, can we unite with you? Can we form a group that's going to be coherent and work together? We were saying, we're coming to take over. It's a very different thing. So if we took a moral approach, we wouldn't have gone in and dominated in that way at all. We would have said, what can we do? What values can we share that will help us work together? And that's what I'm saying is absolute fundamental to the definition of morality.
That's a little bit scary, though, isn't it? Because it's almost like there's an on-off switch. And it may not be us that's switching off, but there's a group of people within societies across the planet that are able to switch that morality switch off whenever it suits them, and to then manipulate our behavior so that we start to adopt praxis that would be very different if the morality switch was on.
Yeah. Well, if we look at morality as a tool again, then it's up to groups and individuals whether they use that tool and whether they think it's worthwhile and whether they want to adopt it. And if I'm saying it's a tool for unification, then almost all communities and almost all societies, at least internally, want to unify. So they're halfway, all groups are halfway towards using morality in the first place. So it's only a small step to using it in a way that unifies beyond the boundaries, beyond the skin colors, beyond the ethnicities. And but that is a choice. You know, once again, one of the features of morality, I said, is that you've got to be free. Anything that tries to impose morality on you isn't morality. You know, it might be religion, it might be a social norm. It's not morality because morality, as intrinsic to the very concept, is this presupposition that you are free.
And if you're free, then that suggests that, let's say you're entirely free from coercion and constraint. That would then assume that it becomes from within. It's a biological. It's passed through our DNA. Because if we're free of the social forces, i.e. the coercive forces telling us what is right and what is wrong, then the only other place it can be either is supernatural or it's part of our DNA that which we pass on from generation to generation, where we all universally and fundamentally have some sort of consensus. Surely.
No, I don't go along with that. In fact, there's a big discussion to be had about what freedom is and whether we have free will. And if we have free will, where that comes from and what the constraints are. But I'd like to just, for the moment at least, think about freedom just as a very simple kind of freedom, which is the freedom not to, it's a bit like what you were saying, a freedom not to be coerced, a freedom not to feel that somebody else is forcing me to do something that ignores my own impulses, instincts, emotions, and thoughts. So that sort of very basic and transparent freedom is what I take as a given by morality. And then going back to saying if morality is a tool which can be used to unify, then, and which we can freely adopt whether we want to or not, then the question is, and you said there were groups of people who seem to be able to switch that off and to be kind of almost psychopathic in their ignoring of any kind of desire for unity and unification, then it becomes a question of, okay, it's a tool we are free to adopt or not. Why should we use it? And why should we adopt it? And why should we try and inculcate it within our society? And then you get onto the questions of why be moral, which is actually the very last article in my series. Why would you want to be moral? And I suggest there's a whole range of reasons. You know, the arguments for being moral, I suggest, are intensely compelling, and we in fact touched on it right at the beginning of this conversation. Our society is in meltdown. It's not a good place. You know, if you're looking from the perspective of us all, of everybody, not just some tiny elite, then we're in a state almost of free fall. You know, there's increasing poverty, there's increasing, at this moment in time, increasing war and threat of war. All these threats mean that we need something to bind us together. We need something to reunite, not just the West, but the whole of humanity. And if we don't do that, we might be heading for, I can't remember what the law is, but there's a theory that intelligent, conscious species wipe themselves out because they're so successful exploiting the environment that they inevitably end up wiping themselves out. Which is why there are no contacts from alien species, because all the clever ones killed themselves. What what I'm saying is that's where we're sort of heading at the moment. We're really heading towards some sort of disunited dystopian disaster. And here's a tool which can actually unify us across the board. If we look at it, if we work it well, potentially this tool could help us unify and tackle. So that was to be a real powerful reason why to be moral. And there are many more reasons, which, you know, there's reasons of selfishness. You know, I want to feel a part of something. I want to feel that I've got a straightforward code of behavior, which I don't have to be thinking about all the time. I'm just going to do these things. I'm just going to be a good person or whatever. There's also just the sheer desire. So some of us, and a lot of us, and I would argue that most of us, have a straightforward desire for fairness and to engage and have loving relationships with the people around us. And that is something that will sustain wanting to use that tool, wanting to use a tool for universal unification.
It was an interesting choice of words there, because you said some of us. So why not the others? And I'll give you a quick example here. Yesterday, they announced that the Ukrainians had a successful missile attack, which they report and they argue had killed a senior member of the Russian Admiralty in charge of the forces in the Black Sea. Now, there's going to be many people across the Western world who would literally just celebrate that, the death of another human being, because they've been told to, that this is the enemy by people further up the hierarchy. However, there'll be other people who will say, well, that's outrageous. It's as outrageous as any other crime that takes place in terms of any conflict between states or whatever. So you've got two groups of people. Possibly the latter group is a lot smaller because they're a lot more knowledgeable, and they tend to have made decisions based on different perceptions of reality. But you've also got this large blob that are rubbing their hands together like they always do in war back home. You know, one of the enemy's dead, one of the leading members of the enemy's dead. That's great. So why are some people engaging in this normative morality, but other people seem to be engaging in a more empirical reality, i.e. the one of the imposed conditioning and the extraneous, not evil because I don't like the word, but the extraneous forces of coercion?
Yeah. You use the word evil, and actually that's one I've played with recently, because it's a very powerful word. And it also describes something which it's difficult to say doesn't exist, or at least an attribute of people which is difficult to say they're not evil. You know, I mean, Suella Braverman or warmongers, you know, it's difficult to say this isn't a kind of evil. But that's an aside. In terms of certain groups being able to ignore any desire for unity or any desire to use a kind of universal unification tool or morality, and morality says, you know, I would say that because of its nature, because of what it's for, it's intrinsic to morality that you'll have a rule, something like thou shalt not kill. You're going to have something like that in there. Otherwise, it wouldn't really work to unify. If I didn't have that rule and I wanted to say, hey, join me in this using this system, alien number one, they'd say, well, actually, you just go around killing people. Well, you know, you don't have this rule, thou shalt not kill. I'm not lining up with you guys. So you're going to have that sort of rule, and that means that actually war is fundamentally immoral. You know, even defensive war is a difficult one to justify. It's a difficult. It creates a huge moral quandary. So
does it? Can I say this? Does it, in essence, though, become a moral quandary if one believes in life just being a small fragment of time, and actually what happens to you after life, i.e. going back to the supernatural, is a lot more powerful? So for people who believe, you know, that you're around for 70 or 80 years tops, whatever you do on this planet is insignificant. because ultimately the glory comes next, the beauty comes next.
Yeah.
The problem they then, of course, have is if they in any way support the killing of another person, whoever that person is, that St. Peter will need nappies whenever they try to approach the gates, because there's absolutely no way that they're going to get through those gates, because they, throughout their life, they justified killing other people that they were told to justify.
I think it's a really difficult thing. So I would say that warfare and the forever war that we've been seeing taking place on Earth over the last, well, forever, probably ever since we started forming these tribes and communities, they started fighting. Quite often they were fighting with each other. And we're seeing, a particular form of forever war in the behaviour of our superpowers over the last 60 years, since the Second World War. There's actually not been a time when there wasn't a war going on, largely with the United States as the main participant or protagonist. So,
who ironically almost always return to the supernatural in order to justify their behavior.
Yes, that's true. So I suppose I'm saying that there's a clear immorality to war if you look at any coherent, rational moral code. Just about any definition you want to give to morality, it's almost certainly going to say killing others is immoral, and war is going to have immoral consequences. However, the way we've got ourselves into wars, and the way wars are recorded and talked about and discussed in the media, is a very confusing and confused scenario. It's not a simple thing. So you can have really decent people, and that's the bulk of the population. I do believe most people are decent, and in their private lives they'll be doing really nice things. They'll be helping each other out, be looking after their families. They'll be helping the little old lady across the road. They'll be stopping their car when they see an accident, that sort of thing. Most people will do that, and yet they'll still be swayed by the information that's being thrown at them by the media and by their culture to support a war against a foreign, or believe in imperialism, or believe that they're part of this great empire which should be going around colonizing the world. So
can I jump back in again? We're coming to the end of part one now, and it's interesting that again that what you've done here is you've sort of conflated a little bit the empirical and the normative, because your argument is a very positive one when you use the phrase most people. I guess a lot of people might come back and argue that if you see an accident, one of the only reasons that a lot of people will slow down is that they can record it on their iPhones and stick it on TikTok. And there's no real empathy between themselves and the victim and the family of the victim. It's now become just more of an optical experience in which you can share your own personal experience and try and get as many people to stick a thumb up on social media, which is a little bit scary. So maybe it's the normative that we desire is sometimes a little bit more powerful than the empirical that we experience.
Yes. So I think that there's a narrative within our society which suggests that people are actually bad at heart. It's the old original sin thing, that actually humans are pretty damned horrible, and they will just stop to film a disaster rather than stop to help somebody in trouble. And I would strongly question that narrative, and I would recommend that anybody watching this reads a very good book by Rutger Bregman called Humankind. It's a wonderful book where he argues for a different narrative about human nature. And
I just interrupt there, sorry. Can I just say, we're coming to the end of part one now. Okay, so thank you, Luke. And absolutely, we can go back to the book, and I'll see you in part two.
See you then. Cheers.